Ahead of them, a few too many people. But right now, life is perfect. Thanks to purple mountains, fruited plains, and a monumental lease offer on the Acura TL. See your Acura dealer for details.
South Florida, we've got big news for you. CBS 4, UPN 33, the Miami Herald and Street Miami, a powerful partnership for South Florida. CBS 4 and UPN 33 combine the most watched award-winning TV stations. The Miami Herald, recipient of 17 Pulitzer Prize Awards, joining forces for the most in-depth breaking worldwide news coverage. From the threat of war to important stories at home, our reporters cover the world in South Florida like no one else can. CBS 4, UPN 33, the Miami Herald and Street Miami, coverage you can count on. CBS 4 News' Mike Kirsch in Kuwait for Showdown with Saddam.
Good evening again, as we continue this special expanded edition of the CBS Evening News. As the deadline approaches for Saddam Hussein to leave Iraq or face war, President Bush is trying to stop talk that the United States is going it alone. CBS's Bill Plant has more now on the president's political strategy aimed at demonstrating support at home and abroad.
The Bush administration doesn't expect Saddam Hussein to go into exile, but even if he did, the White House says U.S. and allied troops would still go into Iraq to disarm the country. Today, the administration released the long-awaited list of allies.
The United States, as the president said, would act with a rather robust and significant-sized coalition of the willing by any measurement.
There are more than 30 countries listed in the coalition of the willing, but only 3, the U.S., Britain, and Australia, are making any significant troop contribution. There are 15 other countries, including some Arab nations, who want to remain anonymous. That list presumably includes Kuwait, where thousands of U.S. troops have gathered, Bulgaria, which supported the UN resolution, and Israel, which has been asked to keep a low profile. Not in the coalition, the U.S.'s closest neighbors, Canada and Mexico. In the U.S., support for the war in Iraq continues to be high. In a CBS News poll taken after the president's speech, more than 2 out of 3 Americans approve, and a large majority think the war will be quick and easy, but not without opposition. Senate Minority Leader Tom Daschle caused a stir yesterday when he criticized the president.
And I'm saddened that this president failed so miserably at diplomacy that we're now forced to war.
Republicans denounced Daschle's statement as shameful.
And any remarks that their lives in some way have been compromised by the President of the United States is irresponsible.
Daschle said he stands by his remarks, but the administration's reaction reflects the sensitivity here to any suggestion that the president may have bungled the diplomatic process on the way to war. Dan?
Bill Plant reporting live from the White House. Trying to counter the Bush strategy are groups and individuals who, for various reasons, oppose the war. CBS's John Blackstone reports tonight what they've been doing.
Across the country today, anti-war demonstrators continued protesting for peace. A now familiar chant was heard in New York. No blood for oil! In Austin, Texas, the blood was red paint in what organizers called a die-in. Death was also the theme in Sacramento, California. The war is now imminent. Peace activists refuse to admit defeat.
It doesn't seem to have had an impact.
That's absolutely untrue. The impact of what the U.S. people have done on the streets has helped the people in the rest of the world.
By any measure, the protests in recent months have been huge, sometimes bringing out hundreds of thousands.
I'm here with a lot of friends, thank goodness, to hope to be heard by Mr. Bush and the people in Washington.
After worldwide demonstrations in February, President Bush did hear.
Democracy is a beautiful thing. I respectfully disagree.
Iraq is not the enemy. War is not the answer. Iraq is not the enemy.
The crowds in the streets, of course, don't tell the whole story. The protests now dwarf what was seen early in the Vietnam era. But these days, politicians don't need to look to the streets to measure public opinion.
If leaders in Washington want to know how this is playing around the country, they simply can consult the many dozens of opinion polls that are conducted on a weekly basis.
Right now, opinion polls show Americans by a large majority support the president. But peace activists are certain more will turn their way once the fighting begins. John Blackstone, CBS News, San Francisco.
As David Martin reported from the Pentagon tonight, U.S. intelligence analysts believe many Iraqi soldiers will surrender during the first hours and days of Operation Iraqi Freedom. And CBS's Tom Fenton reports that's not only because American forces have overwhelming firepower, they also wield psychological weapons.
As night falls, a U.S. Air National Guard transport lumbers toward Iraq. It carries a 10,000-watt radio station in its cargo hold, and from its trailing antenna beams a mix of music and a message in Arabic that urges Iraqi soldiers to resist the orders of an unjust regime. The flights, dubbed Commando Solo, are a weapon in the psychological warfare the United States is waging as the clock runs out. The aim is to encourage Iraqis to surrender without a fight.
The will to fight is something that we can target.
Sometimes the target audience is very precise.
For instance, the scientists and technicians that are in Iraq that may have had a hand in producing or know anything about weapons of mass destruction.
The crew of Commando Solo call it a weapon of mass persuasion. It's not the only psychological weapon in America's arsenal. Today, Iraq was bombed with almost 2 million leaflets carrying similar messages, and Western intelligence sources believe the messages are getting through. But for those who do fight, the American military is ready to launch a devastating attack with weapons that are a whole lot less subtle. They're promising a war like nothing ever seen before, run from here in Qatar at the Joint Operations Center. Here, everything that moves on the battlefield can be tracked, down to the streets of Baghdad.
We better understand where individual enemy forces are, tanks, trucks, people.
And from this room, they will also watch American forces advance on Baghdad in what planners hope will be a short, sharp campaign. It's a high-tech war for a high-tech world. Tom Fenton, CBS News, Doha, Qatar.
High-tech or not, make no mistake, war is a dirty, dangerous business. Just ask any combat veteran. But CBS's Lee Cowan in Kuwait reports American troops now preparing for war are confident that in Iraq they will rule the battlefield.
If there are concerns about the U.S. going it alone, you'd never know it from the boots on the ground.
Well, I'm sure we'll win. I have no doubts.
With war possibly just hours away, relief is mixed with anxiety, and the confidence of U.S. troops seems matched only by their eagerness.
In talking to my Marines, most of them, the minute they stepped on the plane, they wanted to go right into combat.
If confidence can provide some comfort, even in these conditions, it may in the end prove to be one of the best weapons of all. Most argue U.S. soldiers have every reason to be cocky. The decisive and relatively bloodless victory in the last Gulf War, followed by Kosovo and then Afghanistan, offer little reason to think otherwise.
We have had a number of wars in the last few years, so most of those troops have either had direct combat experience themselves, or at least have people around them have combat experience.
But some veterans worry that confidence might be overplayed.
The risks of war are terrible.
Terrence Kinlan was a young soldier during Vietnam. He lost at least 20 of his fellow Marines in just one battle alone.
When they start to die and bleed and lose their limbs, things change, and that naive confidence is the first thing to go.
And the American public, he fears, may be in for just as big a shock.
There seems to be such a terrible lack of awareness in this country now about the potential for serious casualties, and it's so distressing to me.
Confidently going it alone means mourning alone, too. Lee Cowan, CBS News, near the Iraq-Kuwait border.
It is now perhaps the most frequently asked question about war with Iraq. When and how will it start? Retired General Buster Glosson, architect of the air war in the first Gulf War, is author of a new book, War with Iraq, Critical Lessons. And in answers to questions, General Glosson emphasized he can't say what day the new war will start. His experience tells him, though, this: it isn't likely to start until after the sun goes down over Baghdad.
We paid for the systems so that we have awareness at night that they don't have. We have all the advantages for all practical purposes because we can make the night almost appear as day.
For ground troops,
as well as air troops. We don't want a fair fight here, so we'd like to have the maximum advantage we could get.
What worries you the most? What single thing worries you the most?
His ability to put chemical and biological weapons on the troops that are stationed in Kuwait and simultaneously do the same in Israel.
The U.S. troops in Kuwait have been training for such an attack, which would come from Saddam's Republican Guards stationed near the border.
Well, in the first 48 hours, I would hope that the air would be in a position to obliterate these two divisions.
These have to be, you use the word, obliterated.
I would have as few of them remaining as possible, both artillery personnel and tanks.
If you pound with air the Special Republican Guard divisions that are in the South, you think that it's reasonable to be on the outskirts of Baghdad with a ground force in 4 days?
I believe it's realistic. I would only say 4 to 5 days.
When you talk about the oil fields, the possibility of setting the oil fields ablaze,
I think there's a high likelihood that he will torch all the oil fields because of the smoke and everything.
What about this blowing of the dams? Now, in the interview that I did with Saddam Hussein, he said, in effect, under no circumstances am I going to blow the dams.
No one destroys his own wells, and he does not destroy his dams.
But if Saddam did bomb the dams of southern Iraq, the flood could turn the area into a mini swamp in an effort to slow the ground troops. So there are two things down here you could do to at least slow the advance, which is designed to be on the outskirts of Baghdad in 4 or 5 days. One, set the oil fields on fire or turn the oil loose.
Which I think everybody should be expecting him to do.
Two is the two dams in here, he could blow them and make it an advance through a swamp rather than more advantageous.
And I'm quite positive that the commanders over there are expecting him to do both of these dams as well as set these on fire. I don't think that'll surprise anybody.
Despite the fact that